afternoon, everyone. We're at the final session. Wherever you want. Yeah, that's great. Whoever's comfortable for presenting. Welcome. Welcome to the final session of the GeoField convening. We've made it almost to the finish line. Hope you've had a good week so far and enjoyed Rome if you are not local here. And you can enjoy it if you are local. This is our session on open invitation. People submitted these sessions. They're not particularly thematically connected, except around Earth observation and impact evaluation, it seems. Looks like we've got a good lineup. So we are going to hear from 4 folks today, and we'll have a little time for questions after each presenter. So we'll kind of manage that as we go. We're going to start with Dilini here. Dilini Abeygunawardane. She's a research associate with IAMO in Germany and IFAD. And she'll be talking about geo impact evaluation of ag intensification in Mali. Over to you.
So, hello everyone. I'm an economist at IFAD, but the work I'm presenting today is from my previous capacity when I worked at IAMO in Germany. And this is a study that was funded by the Standing Panel of Impact Assessment of the CGIAR. It was basically to understand the causal impacts of agricultural intensification, and the particular project we chose to work on was in Mali. So, just wanted to give a big shout out to this, wonderful team. There was a lot of people involved in this, like doing the remote sensing work. So it was a real wonderful team to work with, and they did a fabulous job. With the constraints we had, so just wanted to give a big shout out to them. And so let's just jump into the work, right? So what are we assessing here? We are assessing a agricultural intensification project, particularly sorghum and millet. The project was implemented by ICRISAT of CGIAR, and the intervention happened in 2014. We will go into the details later. So it was a package of improved seeds, microdosing, intercropping, seed treatment. And the reason why we chose this project was this was one of the eligibility criteria of SPIA, that it had to be a large-scale project which had reached a lot of people, and it had also had to have like a big geographic scope. I think you were part of that, yes. So yeah. And going over to the next slide. So one of the things that I always struggle to establish is that this was a given to us, that the agricultural intensification project achieved these yields. And now our role is to just go and see like whether it had an environmental impact. So we're not going to find whether this is accurate or not. We're just working on this premise. It was an intensification project. It had impact. And what's the environmental impact on this? So why do you do this? Because you got the funding, right? But beyond that, like why, right? So as the title suggested, the whole project was around, oh, Karen, you're here. So she was the funder. So the whole project, we tried to articulate the argument around, are we saving land according to Borlaug, or are we just, is there a rebound effect? I'm not going to go into the details, hoping that you'll understand the concept. And why would this matter in these conditions? Because you're working with different market conditions, right? So you will have places where you would have like under labor, and under capital, but also a lot of labor and a lot of capital. So depending on how connected these markets are, like the impacts will be different, right? Whether you will expand your cultivation over now with the new intensification, maybe you'll just save land and be happy with that, right? And another thing that I always try to emphasize is that something that Ben Phelan always emphasizes, that we talk about land sparing, but land sparing is not land saving, right? These are two different models. Land sparing is really a biodiversity model. So here what we are talking about is land saving, but it's very possible that I might end up talking about land sparing because that's what we are used to. And the other factor is that why the region is particularly interesting is Sikasso is considered the most fertile region, but it's also the region with the most number of stunted kids and the highest poverty rate. So like it's always like you're agroecologically best placed in the country, but why do you have like a lot of poor people? So these makes it very interesting study to look at. And then the other thing, all this data come from Brandt et al. So the idea is like, this is the Sahel. So we are not talking about closed canopy forests, right? We're just talking about individual trees most of the time. And what you see is that trees in farmland is as important as what you find in the conservation area. Most of the time, it's only second to conservation areas. And if you compare like trees between farmland and savannas, like even the mean is higher in farmland than in savannas. So we asked 3 research questions. What's the impact of the intervention package? I might switch between ARDT SMS. If you see that somewhere, that is the name of the project. Apologies. What's the impact of this project on the land cover in Sikasso region? We're working with 2 metrics. One is woody cover, and we added a cropland mask. So we split it into woody cover within farmland and woody cover outside. And the other metric is cropland extent. Obviously, these are all prone to some error, just like everybody was talking about up until now. And the other question that we asked is like, how would these impacts vary across gradients of market access? The 2 proxies we used are cotton and distance to market. And then we also wanted to account for the spatial spillovers. There's some work to be done there, but still. So moving on. One of the things that we like, what's really important to recognize for identification is like the village selection, as in any development project, was based on how good the villages are connected, like how many project partners are there, and then site accessibility, and beneficiary selection was people self-selected into the program. And one other thing is, you see that the first intervention was focused between 2014 and 2015. So we're just going to consider this as a one-off treatment. So I admit this is not the prettiest map, but still it does the purpose, right? Like the dark brown dots are treatment, and some of the green areas that you see are like the intervention communes, but probably the map is not doing a good job. Some of these green areas are also where the Feed the Future initiative worked. So you see that the interventions are not super clustered, but for thinking about this from a spatial sense, I guess it makes sense to have a look at this map. So what data did we use? We derive a panel of Landsat images for total woody cover, and then we split it basically with using the cropland mask for what is inside cropland and what is outside, and the cropland extent. So the treatment is obviously the rollout from ICRISAT, and the core variates we used were travel to time cities, like the usual suspects, so sorghum and millet cotton area, minding you not the yields, right, the area, and then precipitation and temperature, and obviously elevation and soil. So What was the identification strategy? We implemented a spatial lag model with a DID, and we controlled for villages and also sometimes circles, depending on the specification, and also for years. And the identification assumption is parallel trends. And we did matching, and obviously it was a one-to-one matching with a 0.2 standard deviation caliper. And we ran a logic model. And for the matching, we used travel time to a moderate village. And neighbor exposure was our spatial variable, and baseline millet area we used as a pre-treatment variable. And for inference, we used a multiple estimates, the coordinate spatial, and then village clustered, circle clustered SEs, and then we also looked for a multiplicity of like p-values to account for that. So the remotely sensed panel. So we were just discussing a little while ago, like how bad Landsat is, but that's what we used. So why did we stick with Landsat? Because we wanted a long series of data. And we used a brand. There are two brands, like people in the field know, like so we used both their data sets and also the ESA climate change, the CCI data set, and also we did like, so in the modeling, first did land train smoothing and then ran a random forest model, and then also did some nested cross-validation to make the output as smooth as possible. And then what was probably unique about this project was we ran a huge ground truthing effort. So we had like we collected more than 4,600 samples from the field to validate our data, of course. So getting into the results, I will, given that we were working with Landsat images, our accuracy rate is really good. We did have to go through several iterations to achieve this. I remember on the very first day, like I think it was Ariel who said, like, you know, the remote sensing people like to show their art squared. So like that's also why I'm showing it, that we do have a very good product to work with. And then, so am I going back? Yes. So I think for the next few slides, I will go through them very quickly, just to show that some things we got right, but some things we didn't. So for example, agriculture, less intensive agriculture, we got it right, but not really intensive agriculture. And then floating vegetation, I mean, the model did pick some of the trees outside of water bodies as also like as floating vegetation. Let me have a sip of water. Floodplains, we did a good job with floodplains, but also there were issues with some of the other categories we had, but still it was a 90% accuracy, just also showing like what we didn't get right, because I think this was something also interesting with this group of people from the very beginning. Everybody was telling what we didn't get right, right? So the temporal dimensions were also pretty well mapped, right? Like the sudden drops of fractional woody cover was mapped properly. And also the canopy densification over time was mapped properly. So I'm kind of happy to show this. And I'm happy that Karen is here. So like she was telling us on the first day, like she gets to see like these pre-trends all the time, but then what she was telling is like, it's not enough to show this. So, but somehow this is something that makes you happy, right? Because it does feel like it's pretty parallel. But is it so? We can get to it later. So let me go to the next slide. So, so yeah, so this was the one-to-one nearest neighbor matching on common support, and it resolves the pre-matching imbalance. And in the next slide, what we see is like our outcome. So I'll just leave this slide for a little bit since I think I do have some time. So what I'd like to say is that this is where we come back to the Borlaug versus Jevons discussion, right? What do we see? Total woody cover, it's almost flat, right? So there is a slight increase in total woody cover, but it's really not significant. It's like a point. We will have the stats in the next slide, but it's like 0.17 percentage points. The story becomes interesting once you go inside cropland and try to split it. So inside cropland, what you see is a declining trend. So this is where you might think that, oh, this is a rebound effect, right? And if you can see, like towards the end of the time frame, around the 9th and the 10th year, you're already beginning to see significant declines, right? And this is significant at the 5% level. And outside of cropland, what we are seeing is a greening process. So this is where you would agree with Borlaug, right? Like, so, okay, the intensification did lead to land saving. And again, with time, you see that the impact is getting much more significant. But now we come to the full picture and coming back to, do the parallel trends hold? Well, for woody cover outside of cropland, it does not really hold, right? Like it does hold, right? It's not significant. For woody cover within cropland, it's kind of borderline. So since we're all being honest about this, let's just say it out loud. And the cropland footprint, the cropland extent, this was a product that we built with the CCI land classes. So, I mean, yeah. So everyone knows that there are issues with this particular kind of product, but still we wanted to use it. And it's not really our primary sort of headline outcome, but this kind of supports some of the stories that we can tell. So it's just to bring the whole story together. So what you're seeing is, in total, you are seeing a greening effect, which is also significant, but like within farmland, you're seeing a decline in woody cover. So it's kind of it's more of a redistribution story, and it kind of aligns with like a classic intensification story of like, are we expanding cropland with intensification, or are we investing the money that we've gained from intensification back into the production process, right? So then, here, this is where the story becomes really interesting. What we looked at is like the heterogeneity of impacts. So what do we see? So if I don't know whether you remember what I was talking about, is like we wanted to see whether there would be a difference across market gradients, right? So we proxied it with two things like cotton. And I don't think I told you about this, but cotton is like the main cash crop in the region. So, and this is also something that people say that attribute the whole Picasso paradox to, like the reason why children are stunted is because like now they're growing cotton, but it's really not a story that has been corroborated, because then you wonder like, what do you do with the money you've gained, right? But anyway, that aside, what we see is like the distance to mid-sized towns. So this data is derived from the Nelson et al. Data set. The distance to mid-sized towns do not really, the woody cover does not vary across these gradients. But distance to local market, it does. And what's really interesting is like, when it comes to the cotton story, right? What you're seeing is like woody cover outside cropland, and these are all significant at the 1% level, right? Let's go to the next which would probably tell things a little bit better. So what you're seeing is the bigger the farms are of cotton, maybe beyond 580, that's more or less like the tipping point. Beyond that, the greening effect will switch, right? That's when you would see the commercialization then happening, and then the cropland extent would grow. So it really makes sense, right? Like if you're a big farm and then if you're making a lot of money, so obviously those are the regions where you see the greening effect being switched. But for small scale farmers, you don't see this. So this is where you see that's where you do see the greening effect. So with that, I think I will wrap up. I did not have that pretty slide at the end with a take-home message, because this, I mean, you know, all of this comes with some uncertainty, but still it's a very interesting story, especially for people who are involved in intensification, but also land use land cover change, right? Like the whole discussion around, are we expanding farmland because of intensification, or is there a real rebound effect? So the whole idea is that, yes, the woody cover in the region rose by 0.92 percentage points. And one thing I didn't go into detail here is the spatial effects, because there is some work to be done there. What we see is like we did not find a significant contamination because of the spatial, like this with the spatial effects. But then given the nature of the project, you can't just like confidently say like this is not going to have any spillover effect, right? So because of that, we are still trying to tell like it within some confidence interval that there is no spillover contamination at least, but there is some more digging to be done there. And the woody cover obviously declined within, so the whole story that you already listened to, but the story gets really interesting when you look at like how it varies across cotton gradients. So thank you very much, and I will leave it at that.
We're not going to have time for questions at this time for yours, but if we can move it forward. But yeah, thank you so much. That was excellent. We're going to move along to Jeff Michler, who's an associate professor in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics at the University of Arizona. And his talk has an excellent title that I'm going to let him describe.
Thanks. All right, so this is another in a series. This is one in a series of papers that Anna Josephson and Talib Kilic of the World Bank have been working on since 2018, looking at the implications of measurement error and variation across remotely sensed weather products. And this specific paper is coming out of a master's thesis from our student Chandrakant, who's now at Cornell. So historically, rainfall has been a common or a popular instrumental variable because it is ostensibly exogenous to a whole bunch of different things. When we started this project in 2018, it was still relatively common IV. Our work, along with others, has kind of rapidly accelerated the decline of rainfall as an IV because we've all begun to realize it may be external to the system, but that doesn't mean it's exogenous. And this graph comes from a paper by John Mellon called Rain, Rain, Go Away, 196 exclusion restriction violations. It's a great paper. I highly suggest reading it. And what he's showing here is, let's see, rainfall is used to predict all these different things. It's used to instrument income. It's used to instrument agricultural production, voter turnout, human capital, church attendance, violent crime, property crime. And the point of his paper is it can't satisfy the exclusion restriction on all of these, because agricultural production is correlated with income or causes income if you're an agricultural household. So if it satisfies the exclusion restriction for production, it can't for income or vice versa. And so the fact that we're using it to instrument for all these different things means someone's exclusion restriction is being violated. And so one of the things that, one of the messages from this paper is that we as economists, as Melon has shown out, and he's actually a political scientist, we've been using rainfall as an IV. Rainfall is a predictive variable for a lot of different things in a very ad hoc way. So this is just a few, six selected papers. You know, Banerjee and Iyer used mean total rainfall to predict agricultural productivity. Hughes uses mean monthly rainfall. Jacoby and Scufius use the number of rainfall days to predict consumption. Others use total monthly rainfall. And so we're using a lot of different quantifications of rainfall to predict the same thing. And then we're using single quantifications of rainfall to predict a whole bunch of things. And maybe this is okay. You know, maybe maybe these are all substitutes for each other. Or maybe in these specific contexts, these are the right things. But rarely do I come across a paper where someone is making the justification that this is the right one to use for these theoretical or agronomic reasons. The concern that this raises is twofold. One is that we have a bunch of selective inference going on here. People are testing a bunch of different rainfall metrics and then only reporting the ones that work. They're burying the ones that don't work. The other problem is this exclusion restriction problem, is that if rainfall is predictive of this, this, and this, it's probably not going to satisfy the exclusion restriction for all three of those cases. And so what we want to do is provide some guidance to researchers on variable selection. We're going to use the case of the IV case as a motivating case, but this would apply to the use of rainfall, precipitation, or any sort of weather data that you might use in your regressions. Not so much concerned about if it's just a control, but if this is part of the causal story, you're using rainfall shocks as a predictive causal mechanism. We want to provide guidance on what sort of metrics you can use, what sort of metrics are consistently predictive, on what sort of metrics get you basically a whole variety of outcomes. And so this paper is kind of a mashup of two different papers. If you're here when Eleanor and I were talking yesterday, you realize I tend to write overly long papers, then have to cut them up. So this has been cut up into two different papers. One is this methodological contribution, which I think is really neat, and so I'm going to talk about it anyways. We're going to fine-tune a GPT model to read a bunch of economic literature and tell us how economists are using rainfall as an IV, as a way to demonstrate or put data to this claim that economists use rainfall in a very ad hoc way. And then the empirical contribution is going to be using the LSMS data, calculating a number of different rainfall metrics from a number of different remote sensing products, and then seeing how our results change as we vary the source of the data and as we verify the rainfall metric. And you can think of those regressions as your first stage in an IV case, right? So often we're using rainfall as an IV to predict agricultural productivity as the thing that causes migration or schooling or income or welfare things. So when I show these regressions, think of these as your first stage. All right. So mining meaning. What meaning can we mine from the economics literature when we use a GPT model or a fine-tuned LLM? So we first have to construct a corpus of papers. We use OpenAlex, which is the largest database of scholarly material. We do a Boolean search for rainfall as an IV. We have to filter it down, and eventually we get 756 papers that plausibly use rainfall as an IV. We're going to split this. We're going to hand label 10% of this. We have the stable of students who read this independently, marked what they thought was a rainfall IV, what papers had an IV, what papers had an endogeneity problem. We cross-referenced these. They weren't very good initially, so we had to do the whole process again. But now we have this, about 400 papers that are hand labeled of what is actually in them. We split that into a training, validation, and testing set. And then we train a GPT 4.0, and we also train a Gemini 2.5 Flash to learn what constitutes a rainfall IV, what the actual IV is, how it's quantified, a whole bunch of questions. We're looking for it to extract content, but also tell us what is in there. Is a yes or no, a binary, but also extract strings from the paper that we can then feed into like, well, what is the actual rainfall IV here? All right. So for the binary questions, is the paper empirical or not? These are confusion matrices. And so this is the actual result from the labeled data. 1 is, yes, it is empirical. 0 is, it is not empirical. And this is the model predictions. And so when we're just asking the model to say, is the paper empirical or not? It's really good at, it's really accurate at getting that. Very few false positives, very few false negatives. When we ask, does the paper have an IV? We also get very strong performance, 90% precision, 92%, or 90% accuracy, 92% precision. It's really good at identifying when there is an IV, though it will miss some IVs here, and it will claim there's an IV when there isn't about 6% of the time. When we go to a binary, is that IV rainfall? Performance drops really rapidly. Right now, we're only getting things right about 46% of the time. We still have high precision. If there is, it will typically only identify a rainfall IV if it's actually there. But there's a ton of rainfall IVs in these papers that the model is missing. It's not picking them up. It's like 40% of the time, there is a rainfall IV used in the paper and the model misses it. When we go on to string extraction, so then tell us what the actual rainfall IV is. Tell us what the endogenous variable is. Tell us what the independent or the dependent variable is. Tell us what the DOI is. We use BERT semantic similarities to try and match what is in the labeled data to what the model says the instrument is. And here performance is very low, less than half the time it's accurate. There's been a number of papers recently in economics using LLMs to try and extract information from papers. Causal claims has been one that's gone around on the news. Typically, these numbers end up in the appendix or in a footnote. If you look at causal claims, they're getting it right about 55% of the time. Ryan Briggs has a paper that just came out with John Mellon as a working paper. They're getting things right about 65% of the time. So I'll leave it up to you to decide whether is this accurate enough? Is getting it right, is knowing what's in the paper 65% of the time sufficient enough to use this as a literature review tool? What this gives us is an ability to make a Sankey diagram. So now we've collected all the different ways that rainfall is quantified in the literature and all the different things that rainfall predicts. And so just from the sheer confusion of the Sankey diagram, you can see that we're quantifying rainfall in a number of different ways, and then we're using it to predict a whole host of things, right? And so there's lots of different ways we can quantify rainfall, and then they predict a bunch of different things, and then growth gets predicted by a whole bunch of different ways to quantify rainfall. And so there's sort of confusion going one way and the other. And so this is from the whole corpus. Of those 3,790 papers, only 595 papers actually had rainfall as an IV. So, our Boolean search queries are also not very accurate. So having hopefully demonstrated to you that we as economists use rainfall as a fairly ad hoc way, let's look at what the effect of this is if we were going to use rainfall as an instrument for agricultural production. So we're using the LSMS, we're using all 6 countries, we're using 6 different remote sensing products. I'm just going to focus on rainfall here. We also do this with temperature. We have 14 different ways from the literature common ways in the literature that we quantify rainfall. We're going to have 2 different dependent variables, 3 different specifications. This gives us 3,000 regressions that we ran. I won't show you all of them. I'll only show you 1,008. I want to make clear these are specifications. One is just ag production on rainfall. Another has time and household fixed effects, and then another adds measured inputs. We're running 3,000 regressions, so it's really, there's no statistical test to compare across the regressions. So in the paper, we developed some heuristics that will allow us to describe when things seem to be different. So first result, is rainfall a significant predictor of agricultural production? You think it would be? And if you just regress weather, ag production on weather, it is a strong predictor. About 80% of the time, rainfall is a significant predictor of agricultural production. But we know from recent work, especially by Heather Sarson's, that rainfall is correlated with a number of things, especially geographic features. So yes, it's a strong predictor, but it may be correlated with things that are unobservable, things that get captured in the air return. So if we put in household fixed effects that control for a number of different fixed geographic characteristics, suddenly significance drops precipitously. Rainfall is now only a significant predictor of agricultural production about 35–40% of the time. And so this kind of illustrates this exogeneity relevance trade-off. If we let a lot of stuff go into the error term, we get a really strong IV. 85% of the time, these metrics significantly predict output. But this might leave us with an exclusion restriction violation. When we address that using fixed effects, suddenly we have a weak IV problem. And so there's this hard trade-off between having strengthening your argument about exclusion restriction versus having a weak IV. Now 1,008 regressions in what, 5 minutes? All right. All right, so these are specification charts. I showed this on Monday if you were here. Again, the point isn't to read the labels. The point is to look for the patterns in the dots. So these are 168 regressions of agricultural production on one of these rainfall metrics from one of these products using either value or quantity as the dependent variable. And you'll see clustering of results here, here, here. But some rainfall metrics are negatively correlated with output. Some rainfall metrics are positively correlated with output. In Ethiopia, most are not correlated with output. These are the fixed effects regressions, just to be clear. What's concerning is these over here positively predict output, but the same metric over here, simply drawn from a different satellite, negatively predicts output. So depending on your choice of remote sensing product, you can get positive results or negative results. That's Ethiopia. This is Malawi. Stronger positive results, but still, here are positive results along these two metrics. And we go over here and we see negative results over here. All that's changed is the source of the data. The metric is still the same, but I'm getting positive results sometimes, negative results other times. Same is true in Niger, Nigeria. In Tanzania, they don't need water to make their crops grow. Almost no rainfall metric is predictive of agricultural production in Tanzania. Don't know how they do it, but it's pretty amazing. In Uganda, almost every metric is positive and significant or negative and significant. So Uganda really relies on rainfall for production. So they should talk to the people in Tanzania to figure out what they're doing. All right. So thinking about providing guidance on, well, what metrics should you use? What products should you use? One of the things we're looking for in the paper is there consistency across metric? Does mean daily rainfall, is that always a strong predictor across contexts or countries and across rainfall products? In Ethiopia, we have consistency across those metrics. In Malawi, these ones are always have the same sign regardless of the product. In Nigeria, only median is a consistently strong predictor of output. In Tanzania, none of them are significant, even 50% of the time. In Uganda, almost everything could be used to significantly predict agricultural output. Rainfall data from ARA 5 frequently switches signs. CPC tends to underreport rainfall. There's broad agreement between ARC2, CHIRPS, and TAMSAT, which if you've read the basic information documents on those, you'd understand why, because they're built almost exactly the same way. Point is, product choice matters, tends to matter more than metric choice does in some countries. So again, you can get completely opposite results if you just happen to choose chirps over ERA 5. All right. So headline findings, large heterogeneity in the rainfall metric performance across remote sensing products. Few metrics are substitutes for each other. You can't just choose, you can't just use that or that because they're going to give you different results. Mean daily rainfall is going to give you a different result than total seasonal rainfall. So you can't just substitute one or the other. You're going to get different outcomes. And there's this exogeneity relevance trade-off. When we leave a lot of things in the error term, we get a strong IV, but it may not satisfy the exclusion restriction. When we control for fixed effects, we have a weak IV, even though our arguments about exclusion restrictions might be stronger. The core problem that emerges from our work is that variation across products, rainfall metrics, and specifications gives researchers almost unlimited degrees of freedom to search for specifications that yield the desired results. Depending on the type of person you are, I've just shown you how to cheat and get really strong outcomes as long as you just don't tell anyone or don't show anyone all the other regressions that you ran. So I've debated calling this a cheater's guide to IVs, but we don't want to leave you with just how to cheat. We'd like to tell you how to, a set of better practices, not best practices. So you should be cautious about using rainfall to instrument outcomes when there's multiple potential causal pathways. If you're going to use rainfall as an IV, you're going to have to say why. You're going to have to look at that melon graph and say why your exclusion restriction is satisfied and others are not. We need to do a better job of justifying which rainfall metric and which remote sensing product we use. And we may, just to add to your list of robustness checks to do, it may behoove you to check the robustness of your results to different rainfall products. If you're going to pull chirps down, pull TAMSAT or pull ERA 5 and run the regressions with those also and see, do your results hold or are they simply a function of the choice of your data product? And if you're going to use rainfall as an IV, we need to explicitly address this exclusion restriction weak IV trade-off that seems to be present, at least in the LSMS data. Thanks.
Couple minutes for questions if anyone has them.
So using rainfall to predict crop productivity, crop yield. Having established the correlation using the different models, in which context would you use these predictions? What is, let's say, an acceptable framework where you can use that prediction? So if we mention, for instance, early warning system, would that be a reliable system? Or would it be a good system to target subsidies or to target, I don't know, fertilizer use? I'd like to understand which are the type of applications where this approach can provide credible, let's say, information for that type of application. Thank you.
So I'm not, are you aware specific metrics to predict agricultural production in specific contexts or?
Okay. Predicting the crop productivity is a very important task for many applications. One can be early import-export decisions by a ministry, for instance. And of course, this is very difficult to do at country level because you need to know where are the crops, for which season. You need somehow to model the behavior of the farmer. Some farmers would do a set aside of some land, fallow. You might have shift of seasons because of climate change. You may have new policy in place, many things that have, in the end, an impact.
Yep.
But of course, in your approach, you're finding benefit from ChatGPT and this huge amount of papers to establish those predictive, these correlations between just rainfall, which is a easy to measure variable, and the outcome.
Yeah.
But of course, this comes with uncertainty. It comes with error propagation. And I was wondering, how could we use this type of approach, which seems to be very pragmatic, in order to make an estimate, a prediction for which type of application? Could that be something for food security, for instance? Would you recommend that? Or let's say, do you have any specific recommendation? Thank you.
So often we say, oh, well, that's an excellent question. It's just a thing to buy us time while we answer. And that's what I'm doing right now, but it's also an excellent question. I've actually not thought of that, I'll be honest. We were just running these models this week, and so I've been so wrapped up in the technical details, I've not kind of reflected on those broader implications, but I will. Thank you. I don't know if we have time.
Yeah, let's hold. All right, thanks. Cool. So we're going to move to Aditya Sharma, who's a principal project scientist with the School of Public Policy at the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. And he is going to tell us about assessing agricultural impacts in high biodiversity landscapes in India. Over to you, Aditya.
No, it's not mine.
Out of order. Yeah, it's not that one.
No. That PDF. Yes. Okay, hello everyone. I am Aditya Sharma from Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. So today I am going to present my ongoing project work. So this is a small part of work on integrating Earth observation for assessing the agriculture impact in biodiversity rich landscape in India. So we have chosen the Assam as a study area. Assam is ecologically very sensitive areas, but at the same time the agriculture is very highly important for the livelihood purpose. So for this study, we are trying to understand where the agriculture is becoming environmentally stressed and how the Earth observation data can be support sustainable planning. So before going to the analysis, it is important to understand the Earth observation, sustainable agriculture and biodiversity, sustainable agriculture, biodiversity conservation that are interconnected. So these are the broad terms that we have used for our studies. So this explains the conceptual framework of the studies, as the Earth observation provides the continuous spatial information about the land, climate, vegetation, and flood environmental changes. And same time, the sustainable agriculture focuses on the maintaining the productivities while protecting the soil, water, farmer, and the livelihoods. And biodiversity is important because its healthy ecosystem improve the resilience against the climate stress. So this framework is important because agriculture sustainability cannot be studied separately from biodiversity and climate point of views. So here is our motivation behind the studies. In India, the agriculture intensification is creating an environmental pressure through the groundwater extraction, residue burning, monocropping, and land degradations. So these activities increase the emissions, reduce the soil qualities, and also affect the ecosystem stability. So the objective of these studies is to identify the agriculture region facing the high environmental stress areas. So we have chosen the Assam areas, which selected because it is highly biodiversity rich areas, but also highly climate vulnerable. So we need to understand the spatial identification of stressed agriculture region so that targeted intervention can be planned. So these are some environmental challenges that currently face in the Assam regions. So these include the forest loss, climate on agriculture, erosions, flood, ecosystem, and degradations. So these indicate that the agriculture and the environmental systems are under increasing in pressures. So these news article and clips justify why scientific and spatial assessment is necessary. Now I will explain why Assam is environmentally and agriculturally important. Assam lie within the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot, contain the ecologically important landscape, and it contained same around 70% of the population depend on the agriculture, and the large flood prone area is river system, and the climate variability strongly affect the farming systems. The state also has experienced the major tree cover loss in the recent year, 2020-24. So this create a complex interaction between the agriculture, biodiversity, flood, and the climate stress. And these are the some highlights from the Assam region. It shows the agriculture, forest, biodiversity rich region, and the human settlement existing together. This also highlight the increasing pressure due to the land use change and the agriculture expansions. So after understanding the regional context of this work, I will now explain the study area characteristics and the dataset that we have used. The right table shows the detailed dataset we have used, which is based on the rainfall, forest cover, protected areas, agriculture dependencies, and flood vulnerabilities. And also here the rice cultivation dominate the agriculture landscape, while flood and erosion create a long-term risk. So there was one, and the right figure shows the land use land cover map of the Assam region. And I think there was one additional forest class that may not be appearing in the legends. And also there are few bar graph also that are not shown here because not relevant. And this is the data sets and overall methodological framework that we have used. So we integrated the biodiversity indicators, climate indicators, soil water stress, socioeconomic interest, and around 4 to 6 dimension we have selected, and each dimension we have selected lots of indicators, and all the data sets were resampled to 1 kilometer of resolution and normalized between the 0 to 1 categories for the comparability. And we have conducted also the workshop using and conducted a Delphi meter. So based on that workshop and stakeholder perspective, we have gave the weightage to each indicator. And after that, a weighted overlay approach was used to generate a composite environmental and socioeconomic stress index. And finally, the highly stressed cropland grid of the latest NRSC of ISRO data set were identified as unsustainable agriculture hotspots. So a multidimensional approach is important because the agriculture stress is not caused by a single factor. Now I will walk through some results, special result of these studies. So in biodiversity indicator, we have selected the species richness as represent the total diversity of the species that present in area, and while the threatened species richness identify the locations that containing vulnerable, endangered, and critically endangered species. So we can observe that the forested, that this part area, this actually is not showing this one. So we can observe that the forested and the ecologically important region generally support the higher biodiversities and also contain a large concentration of the threatened species. These areas are particularly important. Why? Because they contribute to both the ecosystem functioning and the biodiversity conservations. So regions with high biodiversity and threatened species require careful management, since the land use change and the agriculture expansion can create additional ecological pressures. Similarly, in the biodiversity indicator dimension, we have selected the invasive species that often indicate the ecological disturbance because they compete with the native species and alter the ecosystem functions. And the area with higher invasive species occurrence may be experiencing the greater environmental pressure and the habitat functions. The right side figure shows the vegetation covers. So we have selected extracted data from the NRSC latest land use, which have 18 classes. So this vegetation indicator helps to identify the region which is healthy vegetation cover, as well as the area showing the sign for the degradations. So together, these indicator provide information about ecosystem health and the resilience. Further, we have selected the key protected areas and the key biodiversity areas that are both the legally conserved classes, and the key biodiversity areas are globally conserved classes. So these landscapes support the important habitat, wildlife population, and the ecosystem services. So understanding these locations help ensure that the future agriculture intervention remain biodiversity sensitive. In the other dimension, soil water health, we have selected the soil erosion is if higher in the area experiencing intense rainfall, flooding, and the surface runoff. For the nutrient availability, we have used data reflect that capacity of the soil to support the agriculture productivities. And the groundwater stress, on the right figure, groundwater stress identify area where the water resources are under increasing pressure due to the agriculture activity and the human demand. So soil degradation and the water scarcities influence the long-term agriculture sustainability and the food security. In another dimension, the socioeconomic dependency and anthropogenic activity, we have selected these indicators. Like several districts depend heavily on the agriculture for the employment and the income generation. And many communities also rely on the forest resources for the fuel wood, fodder, and other ecosystem services. So these indicators help identify region where environmental degradation can directly affect the local livelihood. And in the okay, so population density and HDI we have also selected. These indicators have to capture the human dimension of the environmental stress. So we can see in lower development level may increase the socio-economic vulnerability in the human development index. Further, we have also selected or choose the climate variability dimension. In this, we have selected lots of indicators. So here I'm showing only the few of them. Indices like RX 5-day, RX 1-day, warm spell duration, and this. So these climatic change, the rising in the temperature can maybe affect the crop growth, warm water demand, and the agriculture productivity. And these climatic change create additional pressure on the farming system. So extreme climatic events are becoming the major driver of the agriculture risk and the environmental stress. So here we also calculate the drought intensity and the flood susceptibility index. In the flood susceptibility index, we have separately calculated based on the 14 to 16th layers. So this slide shows that longer the warm spell indicate increased heat stress on the crop and the ecosystem, and the drought prone region face reduce the water availability and lower the agriculture productivities. So these indicators capture the multidimensional of the climate related agriculture vulnerabilities. And the last we have selected the emission indicators. So we have used as a proxy from the tropomy data sets. So higher the methane level are mainly associated with the rice growing regions, wetland, and the floodplain ecosystem. So rice cultivation under the flooded condition promote the methane generation due to the anaerobic like decomposition activities. So methane is a major GHG that making it is an important indicator for assessing the agriculture environmental impact. So we have used this as a proxy indicator. And the final is this is the composite environmental socioeconomic index map. So as you can see in the left figure, the higher value indicate region experiencing the higher environmental and human pressure sustainability. So simultaneously, and the left figure shows the 0 to 1, and the right figure we have selected only those stress region which the value is more than the 0.5 categories. So western and the central emerge as a relative the highest stress region in this region, and this integrated approach provide a holistic understanding of the agriculture sustainability challenges. Further, okay, something happened with color. Okay, so we have used the latest cropland data set of land use land class from the NRSC ISRO data. It has 18 classes. So we have used that data of cropland, clipped only crop classes. So left figure shows the cropland over the Assam region, and the right figure shows where we have selected only the top 10% of the grid, 1 by 1 kilometer of grid showing the highest crop areas. So we overlay that grid in the over the high stress region, and what we found that these hotspots present the location where the intensive agriculture overlap with high environmental and socioeconomic stress. So you can see in the ABC color, these are the high stress zone, and grid, this one, you can see these are the grid. These are agriculture crop of 1 by 1 kilometer grid that overlay over the high stress region. That the peach color is our high stress region. So we can see the enlarged view highlight area pixel base 1 by 1 kilometer experiencing the particularly strong sustainability challenges. So this region should be prioritized for the sustainable agriculture intervention in the environmental management. Further, we have also overlaid the protected areas over this Assam region, and what we found that these indicate potentially ecological interaction between the agriculture activity and the conservation priorities. So this assessment help to identify area where the conservation and the agriculture planning need to be integrated. And now come to the over conclusion. So this study demonstrate that the usefulness of the EO data, Earth observation data, and geospatial data analysis for identifying the environmentally stressed agriculture regions. So the result indicate that Western and the Center Assam face the relatively higher environmental socioeconomic stress. And the analysis also revealed that the proximity to several stress agriculture area to be biodiversity sensitive landscape. So overall, this framework support the climate resilient and biodiversity sensitive agriculture planning. The approach also provides a scientific basis for prioritizing the intervention and the improving the sustainable land management. And further, this is our first part of the study. So what we will do, the next phase include the field validation through the survey, stakeholder consultation, and drone-based observations. And future work, we will also integrate some policy planning and assessment for the region-specific intervention planning. And here, the Earth observation data-based monitoring assessment system can continuously track the crop performance and the environmental stress region and the biodiversity conditions. So this framework can also be replicated in other biodiversity rich agriculture landscape also. So overall, the long-term goal is to support the sustainable agriculture while conserving the biodiversity and ecosystem resilience. Thanks.
We've got a few minutes for questions.
Could you say maybe a little bit about when you talk about things like drought intensity, flood susceptibility, what is the time frame that is this kind of in long term, it's like it's more susceptible than 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or is it like kind of forecasting or predicting what which areas are more susceptible this season?
For the drought intensity and the flood are the very long phenomena. So we have selected the long-term duration of 30 years of climate data. We have selected for flood susceptibility and the drought duration intensities. So we are also calculating or identify the intervention using the future climatic data also CMIP6. So on that we have selected around 3 to 5 CMIP6 model based on the different landscape areas. And based on that, we can say that using this future climatic data, and these are the areas where the intervention or agriculture intervention is required. Thanks.
All right. If there's no other questions, we've got a couple. Well, let's do the last presentation, and then if we have extra time at the end, we can see if there's any extra questions for Dilini, and Rachel, you can ask yours to Jeff if you still remember it. Let's wait till the end. Let's just finish up with Lorenzo, and then we'll do final questions at the end. So Lorenzo de Simone is a geospatial technical advisor with the FAO, and he'll be talking to us about integrating EO workflows for operational impact assessment in Senegal and Zimbabwe. Take it away.
Thank you very much, colleagues, at the end of this very long day. So I'd like to show you how we are supporting ministries of agriculture, national statistics offices in countries to create seasonal baselines for agriculture that then can be used to inform on the impact of specific intervention and policies. So it will not really focus on the impact evaluation per se, but how you create the foundational layers that you need in a stable manner. The structural measurements, of course, failure behind the agricultural policy in the sub-Saharan Africa is driven mainly by two drivers. So broken data, broken policy. So we know that crop area estimates, they're off by 20–40% in the good cases. Yield data delayed 6 to 12 months when we rely on official crop bulletins, post-harvest statistics. Beneficiary registries are not georeferenced, so subsidies, insurance, and drought response are allocated on incomplete evidence. Household surveys, they're expensive, we know, slow, spatially coarse, and they arrive after the season is over. So the real gap is not really analytical methods, It is the absence of operational Earth observation infrastructure that generates the reproducible policy-linked indicators and impact evaluation needs. So we know that the Earth observation derived indicators exist before the intervention. They carry known error, and they're institutionally anchored, as I will explain during the presentation. My work is focused on the Estella program. It's a regional project that has just started. It has a regional architecture. It's a program for East Southern Africa. It's 1.5 million. We have a technical partner, University of Louvain. The program is organized by a FAO regional, let's say, hub. Then we have the UNECA, which is the UN Economic Commission for Africa, acting as a regional coordination. And we have 3 pilot countries, Senegal and Zimbabwe, and also Kenya, but today we just focus on Senegal and Zimbabwe. And the country selection criteria is the institutional readiness, plus prior Earth observation engagement, and not just geography. And of course, we also collaborate with the European Space Agency out of the Memorandum of Understanding that is established with the FAO. We have 6 fundamental activities within the Estella project: the crop type mapping, crop yield forecasting, field boundary delineation, crop health monitoring, drought and flood monitoring, and credit scoring, which basically we work together, in countries in a kind of stack manner. An example from Senegal. So when we started the collaboration with Senegal, we reached out to the DAPSA, which is the statistics division within the Ministry of Agriculture, who have a mandate for agricultural survey. They run an annual agricultural survey every year. And we said, okay, we have to work with them to see how they're currently collecting the data on the ground and if this data can be connected to remote sensing so that then we can have crop type maps, we can have early estimates of the crop area. Eventually, we can integrate that with crop type, with a crop yield model. But then we soon realized that out of the 16,000 data points they provided us, which you can see in the map, many of them were erroneously georeferenced. So you had like points taken along the road, polygons which are not closed. And bottom right, you can see a centroid between four parcels. So when you put this data in a remote sensing, you have a lot of noise. And in the end, out of 16,000 data points, only 1,000 data points were correctly georeferenced and linked to the survey. So we work with them to modernize the annual agricultural survey. We piloted this in Nioro. It was a success story because we could show that we have much more accuracy. And then the government has upscaled this to 6 districts in 2024. And now the idea is to scale it up at the national level. But we've also been working with establishing more collaboration between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Bureau of Statistics and the Center for Ecology Studies, who have more remote sensing capacity, so that one institution gets the in situ data right, the data collection on an annual basis. And the other partners have access to the data and they produce the baselines on a regular level. So you can see on the left, for instance, that's the national crop type map for 2018 using the data as it was collected. On the right hand, and you see 68% is the overall accuracy, and we have a lot of confusion. On the right-hand side is the first crop type map developed for Nioro district when we implemented the adjusted agricultural survey, and we reached 88% of accuracy in that case. And so what you see here is a very interesting slide showing that when we combine the crop type map with the data collected using the probabilistic survey, and then we run a regression estimator for the area of each crop, basically we reduce the uncertainty, we reduce the error. So the light green is the accuracy for the coefficient of variation for the area estimation at national level for Nioro district for millet, groundnut, and maize. And you can see you have 21% of error, 20% for groundnut, and for maize. When we integrate the crop type map and we use a regression estimator, we basically decrease the error by a large margin without increasing the sampling density. This means saving money for the NSO. So now the NSO, the National Bureau of Statistics, can use this approach to actually reduce the presence in the field, and of course to save money and still reach the necessary accuracy. So what we want to do now, we want to scale up the approach. So we want to have that type of field activity for all of the districts. We want to have more collaboration with other institutions so that the remote sensing part is being carried out on an operational basis, and also integrating the yield forecasting. But we're also adding a new concept now that we have the crop type maps correct. We want to introduce the Sen4CAP, which means Sentinel for Common Agricultural Policy, which is an approach that links the Earth observation variables to the plots and linking the plots to the farmer, so that we have two ways, to monitor the impact of agriculture on the land, and vice versa, cross-validate the declaration of the farmer of compliance with the agricultural policy with what the satellite data is telling us. Second example, Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, we've been working with the Ministry of Agriculture, the Bureau of Statistics, and we started in 2023, starting from the field survey. So we decided an area frame because there was no area frame before. So we divided the entire country in a grid of cells, 4 square kilometers each, and then we have overimposed a crop mask, actually an agricultural mask. It's not really a crop mask, from the world serial global map, just to have an idea of, within each 4 square kilometers cell, how much it is agriculture. So based on that, we've been creating 4 strata based on the density of agriculture. So from low density to high density. Then we've been applying Cochrane's formula to assess the number of samples required for each stratum based on the acceptable error. And we've been using that essentially, to go there on the ground and to collect this data. So boots on the ground with the GPS. So this is the design of a dual stage area frame. You see the primary sample units, which are those blue squares. And then within each, we have 25 random data points, which are the secondary units. But then we said, okay, this data is okay to assess the area statistics and the error. But what about now creating the map? We need training data. So we use the windshield. So as cars drive from one primary survey sampling unit to the other, the driver is driving like 40 kilometers an hour. The 2 enumerators use specific apps to look at the crops on the side of the roads and take GPS data points. So we put this together to augment the number of samples, and we collected 2,910 sample data points. And then we further augmented this. Essentially, we've been working with the data we had to go from data points to polygons. We added 500 non-crop points from the world cover map. And in the end, so we have enhanced, let's say, the database in this way. And this is the result of the collective work for the summer 2023/2024. And as a result, we've produced the first national crop type map at 10 meters resolution in Zimbabwe. The map was generated using Sentinel-2 bands, both the 10 meters and the 20 meters, time series, vegetation indexes such as NDVI, NDWI, and brightness, red edge indices, time series, and statistical metrics. So the mean, median, standard deviation, minimum and maximum of the vegetation indexes, and red edge time series as input features for the classification model, a random forest. But then we've applied also synthetic minority oversampling techniques, which I think I discussed also with my colleague earlier on, to artificially increase the sampling for the sample points, so the number of samples for minor classes. So as expected, the map shows an agricultural landscape notably dominated by maize in yellow. Sugarcane, oilseed crops, sesame, linseed, and soybean are concentrated locally in the southeastern part of the country. Sorghum and millets are also identified by the map across the country. Discrimination between these crops with maize by remote sensing can be challenging and will be further discussed in the quantitative accuracy assessment. So this is a zoom on an intensive sugarcane farm in Chirezi district and on a vast maize and millet area in the center of the country. The parcels, as you can see, are well delineated using Sentinel-2, and the structure of the agricultural landscape is well captured by the map. Then we've run a quantitative accuracy assessment of the map. It has been performed using 25% of the windshield dataset. not used for training, thus ensuring independent validation. So the map achieved an overall accuracy of 77 class-specific F-score, as shown in the bar chart. The confusion matrix of the classification is shown in this figure, although the numbers are a bit small. And we have significant confusion between maize and soybean and maize and non-cropland classes, both under the form of commission and omission errors. Millets, maize, and sorghum also seem to be prone to errors, which is expected due to similarity of these crops. Sugarcane is particularly well classified, which can be explained by the fact that it's very localized, irrigated, and therefore strongly contrasted with the rest of the agricultural landscape, especially during the drought period. And the binary cropland, non-cropland confusion matrix is quite, we have quite a high F-score, as you can see for the cropland and non-cropland classes. So we've repeated this for the second season, but what we've done in the second season, essentially, we have expanded the windshield to 16,000 data points. So going from 2,900 to 16,000 data points. And essentially what we have seen is an increase of the non-cropland, cropland F-score. So we have now at 0.96% of accuracy, and the overall accuracy of the map basically is much better than it used to be in 2024, 2025. This is thanks, of course, to the increase in the training data. Both of the maps now have been integrated within the farmer registry in Zimbabwe, as we will see in a minute. So in order now to provide to the country the relative information for the early warning associated with the crops. So this is the drought layer that we had to add. And how do we measure now the drought? We measure the drought using a so-called vegetation health index, which is a combination of the vegetation condition index plus times the temperature condition index. So we compare the temperature and the NDVI for a specific decade with the historical one. But the trick is there here that we've introduced some AI in order to not compare the dates, but to compare the values of those indicators at the same phenological stage of the crop, which makes a difference. So for this, we need the crop type map, but we also need to be able to shift our analysis to the right window, depending year by year, so that the start of the season, they're all batching. And so you can see what happens here, like on the below left, for instance, actually on the second bar chart on the top, where we have the curve, sorry, the line chart, you can see that if we use the fixed date to compare, you have a mixed signal there. But on the right-hand side, we shift the curves across the various seasons, and then we can make a better analysis. And in the map chart below, in the maps, sorry, below, on the left, you see that if we didn't use this adjustment, we would have basically, we would have a 0.55 of vegetation condition index, whereas in reality, it's the condition index for that pixel would be 1, which means healthy. So this is then being brought all together under the farmer registry. So this is another level of complexity, where we bring everything under the plots, which are georeferenced and are linked to the farmer. So now for each farmer, essentially, it is possible to know what is cropping, what is the expected yield, what are his declarations, and how frequently has it been flooded, how frequently has it been subject to drought. And for the flood, we are connected to WFP Adam platform, but we soon want to collaborate with FAO's EVE platform so that we can have this layer of integration. Sorry. So this is what the dashboard looks like. And of course, we can switch between the crop type map, we can switch to the crop productivity map, we can query by farmer name. Of course, this is just for a selected number of farmers, not all of them. And it's a preliminary way to bring everything under, one digital ecosystem. And this is the Sen4CAP component that now we are integrating to verify essentially the farmer declaration compared to what's the let's say, what are the requirements not to comply with the policy. And we are introducing three key indicators, so-called also markers: the subparcel heterogeneity, so it's a per pixel analysis; the bare soil markers, which tells us, if there is cover crops or not, and also the regularity of the cultivation in the plot, and then the change of cover from year to year. So if there is permanent grassland, is it transformed to arable land or permanent crop? These are all usable for causal inference because they have three, let's say, three properties. First of all, reproducibility. So the Sen4CAP and the Sen4STAT workflows are version controlled and transferable. We quantify the uncertainty. This is very much important because any map without uncertainty is basically just, an artifact. And we see a lot of time people counting pixel and multiplying by area and coming up with area estimation this way, but that's wrong. And pre-intervention availability. So the systems run annually. Actually, they run seasonally on the national infrastructure. So we work with the High Performance Computing Center in Senegal and with the big data lab that is now available in Zimbabwe. So why this matters is because post-hoc Earth observation instruments can mislead, and these indicators are designed to avoid that problem. So pretreatment, non-error, institutional anchored. The product is the system, of course, is not the map. We really work a lot on national ownership so that the country has all the needs, all the required data produced in the country, managed by the country, and hosted in national cloud computing centers. So the ZCHPC is the Zimbabwe High Performance Computing Center. Validation and protocols and calibration workflow are reusable by the SADC country, the SEALs, and other member states. So we work with the regional centers. And of course, we have support from the University of Louvain, who's our service provider and well-known academic player. And this is how we are ensuring the institutionalization in Zimbabwe. So after 2 years working to the pilots, although the pilot is at the national level, we felt the urge now to work with policymakers, with directors, and with the technical people so that by the end of the story, they use this as their own national system. So we needed the endorsement. So we've established a steering committee, which is driven by the permanent Secretary for Agriculture. Then we have a secretariat run by the Agricultural Market Association. And then we have 4 technical working groups: data governance and standards, Earth observation, geospatial analytics, ICT infrastructure and hosting, and field operation and farmer registration. So we have established a roadmap. We want, in 3 years' time, we want this approach to be endorsed by the government and having a regular budget to run this. So FAO is just being a technical advisor and a glue, let's say, providing the platform to bring all the partners together. Okay. So essentially, we have some limitations in the countries. It can be bandwidth. It can be the need to do more georeferencing of the parcel level at the moment of the registration of the farmer under the farmer registry. So we're trying to improve, let's say, the overall solution. But we realized, for instance, that like in Kenya, where there is already 9 million farmers registered, it is not possible to go to the farmers to georeference their plots. So in that case, we need a mobile app delivered to the farmer and ask the farmer to do the self-registration. That's the only way to reach out. In Lesotho, it's different because there is much less farmers. So let's say we can have a more, let's say, of a combined approach. So we really encourage to build the baseline. So having your crop type maps done correctly from the beginning and use that as your, let's say, your baseline. And then, of course, Estella builds up the rest of the application. Thank you very much.
Questions for Lorenzo?
I think specific questions. Sorry. Very exciting. Thank you.
Three quick questions. Yield estimation is super hard. So how do you plan to crack this nut? Second question, data accessibility to be used for causal estimation, evaluation. We would need to access the data. Is it at the discretion of the countries? And the third one is about the risks of misuse of this data. You mentioned that it could be used to verify that farmers are doing what the government says. In Senegal, I have no. It could be okay. In Zimbabwe, that can raise some questions. So how do you handle that? Thank you.
Very much. So starting from the crop yield modeling, we've been working with a various array of tools. So in Peru, we've been working on a process-based model for the main crops using DSSAT, CERES, SALUS with Michigan State University. And of course, that requires a big investment and a focused project, at least 2 years, okay? But today, in Peru, the Midagri has a very sophisticated way to monitor the producers, and there is a crop yield model behind it to verify the requests from farmers for compensation when they lose the yield, okay? So it's very much working well, but we needed to calibrate the model, have the crop cuts, know about the farmer practices. So it's very much demanding. In Zimbabwe, we're not there yet because we're working with crop cuts, but there is no time series for that. So what we're doing, we're implementing a so-called statistical model. So we work with the University of Valencia on the ARIA model, so which runs a regression between crop bulletins, so time series at the district level, but then we have an intelligence to have dynamic crop masks, which are annual, so that we can backcast the presence of the crops. And we also use the dynamic crop calendar, like the one I showed for the drought, where we are able to deduct when we had the beginning of the season and the peak and the harvest in a dynamic way. But of course, that type of instrument, you can use it for an administrative level prediction, 12 weeks before, 8 weeks before, and up to 4 weeks before the harvest. But you can't really use that to infer on the productivity of a specific farmer, on subsidy. That's more for food security. And the beauty of that, it's very cheap to run. The limitation is that it can only predict between the variability of the data you provide. Okay, but you can make it more intelligent. You can give not just because we use EVI, Enhanced Vegetation Index, but you can use the soil maps. You can stratify. You can improve, let's say, the model. Accessibility to data depends from the country. So some countries are really easy. Some other countries are still quite much concerned with the data. So even for FAO, when we want to demonstrate the crop type mapping, we have to deploy the mapping tool on the server. And we have access to the data the very day of the training, of the workshop, not even before. So it can be quite complex. Regarding Zimbabwe and other countries where there could be, some challenges in giving full access to this data, our intent through the governance mechanism is exactly to have, a path shared with them upfront so that we realize if something is not feasible and will not work, at least we know that clearly remote sensing is an objective way of seeing things. So you cannot manipulate that data. They of course, they know. But at the same time, I think that there is now incentives for private and public-private partnership. So there are, how can I say, opportunities for more revenues if you can really have, a digital twin, of agriculture. So I think there could be also new options for revisiting, this type of limitations, because maybe there are new opportunities opening. We will see how we go. We have 3 years time to have the endorsement. Let's see how far we can go. Yeah. And if I may add just on the incentives, many credit institutions they would like to expand the number of customers to whom they can borrow, they can lend money, right? But of course, farmers, especially smallholder farmers, they're typically not, they don't have access to credit. Why? because they're not visible, they have no records, they have no collaterals. But when you use this type of approach where you have the parcels and you can, so we're working on, within the Estella project, there was no opportunity to put it there, but we work on the GeoCredit, where we show how a baseline model, like a FICO model for scoring bad and good payers, if you ingest Earth observation data, how that changes your ability to discriminate bad and good payers, to make a model which is more inclusive and more fair, but it's also, you know, reliable. So we're working on that, and of course, credit institutions, they want that because they make business out of it. So we also hope that this type of incentives can let's say facilitate the process. Thank you.
Let's give one more round of applause to all our presenters. So that brings us to the end of the GeoField convening. On behalf of the GeoField core team, we want to thank all of you for being here, and to all the presenters throughout the week and folks who made this happen. Reese and Dev Global, thank you so much. And yeah, we hope we get to do this again in the future. Just one bit of housekeeping. I think if you have one of these badges, this stays at FAO. I think they're going to be collected at the exit when you leave, but maybe not. I don't know. That's what I heard though. So heads up there. And then anything else, Reese?
There's a little box as you leave the
Oh.
community that says drop in this time.
Okay.
That's it.
Where is it? You know?
It's right. If you're walking out, or it's to the left and you come in, so I think right to go out.
Cool.
Next to the security.
I'm an expert.
Yeah, right. Take a picture. All right. Thanks, everyone. And safe travels home if you're traveling in. Yeah.
Where's he?